Let's sew a fun and easy blouse with a pattern from Walmart. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today I am working on a new blouse. So with this, I really wanted it to have two different colors as I had these two fabrics that worked really well together, but I don't have enough of either one of them just to do a straight blouse out of that. So I am going to be combining it. So my first step was I cut out all of my pattern pieces and I have laid out my fabrics so that I can cut them out. So for the front, it is just this one pattern piece that I have, and we're cutting out the fabric on a fold. So I have both of my fabrics laid out right here. You can see that I have them overlapped enough so that there would be a seam allowance. So when I sew these two fabric pieces together, it will add up to the full pattern piece itself. And then I am repeating this for the back. So for the front, we're cutting it out in the fold. The back, you are actually cutting out two individual pieces though, as they will be sewn up. So I'm just continuing with this idea of cutting out both like that top portion and then the bottom portion and sewing it together. Next, I just started working on cutting out the sleeves. So again, a really simple pattern, weren't too many steps. And then with the sleeves, there was the addition that you could add some cuffs to it. So I cut that out using the maroon pattern. So this is all my fabric. Next, it was just time to prep all the edges. So in whatever way you are comfortable doing that. And then once I did that, I did sew the top and bottom for the front pieces as well as the back pieces. So here's the pattern I'm using. It is a McCall's pattern, L9481. I got this from Walmart actually. It was incredibly cheap for $2.97, so I'm excited to see how it turns out. The first step is you needed to add darts onto the side. So there's lots of different ways that you can mark your darts. I always go back to the pattern piece no matter how many times I mark them, just to make sure that I'm getting them in the correct spot. Once I had it pinned up on either side, I just took that seam. I read somewhere that when you're doing a dart, you shouldn't actually backstitch, you should instead knot it, so I have been getting into doing that as well. Then it was just time to sew up the back portion. Now on the back, there is going to be a dot that you need to mark, and that is where you were sewing, starting your sewing and then sewing all the way down from. So this will give you a little opening at the top, and we're going to be adding a button there at some point in the pattern as it goes on. So this is what my back currently looks like. It looks really good. And here's my front. So now what it's time to do is match up those shoulder seams. So very easy, just pinning these together. And then I'm just gonna be taking a straight seam across for both sides of the shoulder, making it so that we have both the front and the back are connected so that we have an actual shirt. So here is what that seam looks like. It looks really nice. I am being careful with my thread to make sure that I'm using the correct color depending on the fabric. This is what the shirt looks like on, and I'm excited with the fit. Now it was just time to start pressing everything out. So all those seams that I had taken, making sure that everything was laying nice and flat and smooth. I did the exact same for the dart, making sure that it was pressed nicely. The pattern does tell you which way to press the dart as well. And then I did press open that seam for where I had attached the top and bottom for like the front and the back of my shirt, just to make sure everything was good. Now for the back, what we're going to be doing is where we had that opening, you are going to press that flat, and then you are going to press your raw edge underneath the fabric again. So what I mean by this, essentially you're folding it in on itself so that you get a really nice rolled hem effect. And once I did that using my iron, I then just pinned all of this in place, as you can see I'm doing here, and I will show you a close-up of exactly what this looks like. But you can see you just get this really nice rolled hem, and now we're just going to be sewing that down. I believe I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this. The pattern does tell you how much of a seam allowance to do, so you're just going to be sewing either side so it has a very nice clean look to it. And this is what it looks like from the front. Everything comes out really nicely and really clean. Now this was the only tricky part of the pattern for me, was using this elastic cording. So this is what it has you use to secure the button onto the back. I think I got too thick of elastic cording, so I ended up having to hand stitch this, and then I actually took out a little bit of the seam that I had done so that I could get those raw edges under. I would highly recommend getting a more flexible elastic cording. I got mine off Amazon, and I think that may have just been a bad choice overall, but I got it to work. Next, it was time to add the bias tape. So this is how we are going to be finishing the raw neckline. So with the right side together of your fabric, you're going to open your single fold bias tape, pin that onto the raw edge of your fabric, and just take a seam all the way around at the top. This will then allow you to be able to fold over the bias tape so that you have a nice and clean look. Once you go through with that first seam, you are then going to be going through again and doing the understitching so that it makes sure that the bias tape stays down and you don't see it when you are going through doing your final stitching. So here I am just going through and pinning all of this together, making sure it lays nice and flat. So I used my iron first, and then I pinned the bias tape in place As you can see, the raw edges are now gone, you can't see them, and from the front it has a really nice and clean look to it. The first step what I had you do is you actually went through and basted this down so that you'd be able to see from the front where you needed to stitch. I'm not always the biggest fan of basting as I feel like it does waste time, but in this case I would highly recommend doing it as it does give you a nice and clean look from the front, and you are able to then go through, remove those basting stitches. So here's what it looks like. I think it turned out really well. And of course you can get the single fold bias tape from Joann Fabrics, Walmart, Amazon. There's so many different places you can get it. Now what it was time to do was to sew up the side seams. Now there is a dot on the side seams that you do want to mark, as the shirt has a little flap on either side, so just a little opening. That's a decorative touch, so you do not want to sew all the way down. So once I figured out where that was on either side of my shirt, I then just pinned up both sides, and then I'm just going to take a nice seam. Be sure that everything is lined up nice and correctly, you don't have any gapping, as you could see that I was being sure that my shirt did there. So now what it's time to do is just take a seam for both of these sides and to sew them up. So this was just using a straight stitch. Always be sure to back stitch your seams so that I make sure they're nice and secure. So this is what my shirt currently looks like. I actually really like how it's coming along. The neckline looked really nice and smooth, the sides look nice, and then you can see the little flap down at the bottom. So now what it's time to do is to start to work on the sleeves. So the sleeves, since I did go with that option B, there is going to be a cuff, but first it was time to do some gathering stitches as well as sewing the cuff together. So the first step was to sew the cuff just to bring those short edges together so that you have essentially like a tube, and we are then just going to be sewing up the short edges for both sides. And then I will be going through and doing some gathering stitches. So first I sewed up the cuff so that it would have that one full effect that we'd be able to add, and then I started doing the gathering stitches. So for the gathering, be sure that you are doing 2 basting stitch rows. This will then allow you to be able to pull it together. You don't want to just do one, even though it may seem easier. 2 will give you the most stability and allow you to really make sure you're getting that stitch done correctly. Then with right sides together, I sewed up the short edges for the sleeve itself so that we will be able to add the cuff to it. So now with all that done, it was time to just press everything out. So pressing open that seam, and then for the cuff, what you're going to be doing is folding this so that the wrong sides are together, folding it in half, pressing it open, and now we will be able to attach this to our sleeve. So for the sleeve, I did then press the seam, and then with right sides together, you can see here I'm doing this wrong. I really want to emphasize that you want the right side of the cuff with the right side of your sleeve. You are pinning that part together, and then you are going to sew it. So here I'm doing it correctly. They think the pattern did tell you to baste first and then sew it, so you can decide if you feel like your cuff is laying really nicely on your sleeve. If you want to go ahead and baste that just to get it done and then sew it, you could definitely do that as well. I just went ahead and sewed everything at once. I think it came out really nicely though, and it looks good. So once I had that done, it was then time to sew the sleeve into the shirt. So this is actually a multi-step process where you are pinning the right side of your sleeve to the right side of the shirt, and then you are gathering it, and then you're basting it, and then you sew it. So I have one completed here, so I'm going to show you now step by step exactly how we do this. So with the right sides together, I'm going to pin my sleeve into my shirt. I always start at the bottom for pinning, making sure that those seams are lined up, so the seam of the side of the shirt with the seam of the side of the cuff. And now I'm just going to pin this so that the right sides are together. Then at the top there should have been a notch or a dot depending on how you marked it, and then that will be going where the top of your shirt is, so where the kind of that shoulder seam is. You will then pin that. Then you are going to gather and very carefully kind of adjust your fabric along the way to make sure that the sleeve is fitting into the armhole of your shirt. You don't really want it to buckle though, which is why you're going to go through and baste it first to see does everything lay how you'd like it to, and then once you are happy with how it lays, then you can go through and actually take that final seam. Once you have it done, you are almost done with your shirt at this point. Now it's just time to go through and do the hem. So for the hem, this is a rolled hem, so I just went through, pressed everything once, and then folded it all over again and pressed it a second time. Pin this up for all the way around the bottom as well as those little flaps. So this was just taking a straight seam all the way around, securing it all in place. Then the last and final step is to sew on your button. So the button is how we are closing the top portion of our shirt where we had that little elastic cording. I just used a really small black button that I had. I think it added a nice decorative touch. You could definitely do whatever you would want to have fun with your shirt. This is what my shirt looks like though. I think it turned out really well, and I did like the little pattern hack idea, so that is two different options, so I was able to use both of these fabrics and it came across really nicely. Now I did enjoy this pattern, especially for only being $2.97. I think it was great, and it even had different shirt options within it, and as you can see there would be different ways that you could expand it to make different types of shirts using that base pattern. I hope you enjoyed this video and it helped you understand how to make this pattern. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Let me know what you want to see next. We are getting into some fun fall and holiday videos. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe.